Hello my beauties, how are you all doing? It is, and I feel like I start a lot of my tutorials this way, it is freezing here. If you can believe it, it is March and we had snow yesterday. I mean, it rapidly turned to like a slushy, muddy mess, and now today it's just raining. It's not raining quite yet at the moment, but it is raining all day and it's just cold. It's windy, it's cold, and it's wet. So it's like literally the trifecta. There was no tutorial in February. I'm not going to lie to you. I was busy. I went on holiday and I had quite a lot of my own stuff that I needed to finish, but I'm back. But it is a little quick one today. In theory, it should only be 5 minutes, but who knows? You know I like to talk a lot. Today, it's not really a tutorial as in a painting. I'm going to show you a technique for how to get nice, crisp, clean lines in watercolour paint. We all know watercolour is a cruel mistress and it likes to travel about as it sees fit rather than in our control. So I'm going to show you a way of controlling it so we get nice, papery, clean, thin edges, not those like fluffy edges that we sometimes get. Not that there's anything wrong with fluffy edges. Sometimes we can use them to our advantage as well. But, you know, if you want a crisp, clean edge, this one is for you. Right, let's get this party started. So what have I got and what am I using today? So I have, like always, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I have my 2 pots of water, one for washing our brush and one for mixing our watercolours. Always very important. I know I bang on about it all the time, but it is. I am using watercolour paint out of a tube today. Again, it doesn't really matter with this. You can do exactly the same if you've only got them in the little pans. It's just what I've got and what I've picked up. And I've already squirted that into my palette here. Again, colour-wise, because we're just doing a technique, we're not painting anything, it doesn't really matter what colour you pick up. Yeah, it doesn't matter. This is just, again, the one that I happened to use. I have got a couple of paintbrushes. You don't really need a couple of paintbrushes. It's just I grabbed them because I wasn't really sure how it was going to go. So all of mine are Sable paintbrushes that I'm using today. But again, synthetic ones, whatever you've got is absolutely fine. I am going to be using not a tiny brush, but a relatively small brush. Look, you can see this is what happens when you leave your brushes in water and they get like a horrible little fluffy end and a bend on them. It's a really naughty habit to do and I do it all the time. So do as I say, don't leave them in the water, not as I do, which is what I do. Okay, also we've got our 300 gram cold press watercolour paper, which is your usual wavy type. To be honest with you, it doesn't overly matter what you use if you're just using this as like sketchbook stuff. So yeah, don't worry too much as long as it's durable enough and it is watercolour paint. So when I say what we're doing today is learning to, or showing you how I get nice crisp edges on my watercolour paint, we all know, anybody that does watercolour painting a lot or has tried it or has dabbled in it or any of those things knows that because we're using a wet product, generally on quite a wet surface, we get lots of bleeding in it, which is brilliant. We can use that all to our advantage, but sometimes we need to tighten things up a little bit. You know, like if you're trying to do an edge of something or you want something that's a bit more structured, you need that water to hold itself rather than just kind of splay out. So when I say about the bleeding and the movement, this is kind of what I mean here, where you can see that, you know, we've applied our colours and then they've kind of bled into each other. And even though, say, I have painted a solid line like that, because the surface is wet and because the paint is wet, it's gone, oh, I'm going to go for a little journey, and it's travelled across the paper. And then we've ended up with something that is quite woolly. And we want to look at, this isn't the best example of it, but it will kind of give you a bit more of an idea. So what we're looking at today is how do we get these kind of crisp edges, which, like you can see here, let me move that down so you can see there, you see that very fine crisp edge that would be very difficult to draw on I like to call them like papery edges. They work really well for petals on a flower, but you can use them for anything. But yeah, that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at how can we catch that water and how can we control it. And it's a really super simple technique that I use, and I'm going to demonstrate it to you now. Right, let's begin. Let's see how we go. Right, so if you have watched a lot of my tutorials, you will have heard me say and talk about quite a lot before about I like my lines or my texture or my edges or any of those things to kind of come from nowhere and disappear to nowhere. I find them personally, for the type of work that I create, the type of work that I like to look at, I don't like to be able to see a beginning and end. I like to see something that kind of like looks like it's arrived on the page like it always belonged. So when I say deliberate lines, I'm going to show you what I mean by this. So if I pick up some paint and if I do a line like that, that is quite a deliberate line. It's quite heavy, it's quite weighty, which obviously I know, you know, can be like used in some respect, but to me, that is not very pleasing. I want to make it softer, I want to make it subtler. I don't want to kind of see where it comes and where it goes. So I'm going to show you how to get like a super papery thin brush, and I've decided that that brush is like, for the purposes of this, is a little bit too thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start again and I'm going to pick up my watercolour paint. And so let's imagine that this is the edge of, for argument's sake, let's say a petal. And this is the edge, and I just want to, I might have put my paint down, but I just want to firm it up a little bit. So I want an edge. And so I start drawing an outline, essentially. That's what we're doing. We're essentially drawing an outline. And again, now, if I was to draw that round some of our watercolour paintings, like that we've created this kind of soft, fluid motion. So we've got all this lovely movement that we have here. That looks quite harsh. It's quite jarring against it. So and it's quite a thick line. So how do I get that finer? So what I do is I've now applied my paint. I've outlined whatever it is that I want to outline. And now what I've done is I've washed the water off my brush in my dirty water. I've then gone back to my clean water. Now this is the important bit, so I want you to watch, and I might zoom in for this, is I am going to put my clean water outside. I'm not actually touching the line, and I am moving. I'm just kind of gradually like agitating the water to then touch that edge. Now look, do you see what happened there? So I am bringing the water to the paint. So the water is going to the paint. See, like that? There we go. So, and again, I'm just agitating. So obviously the paint can't have dried at this point. It needs to be done quite soon after. And the really important thing to notice is that I am clean off my brush. I'll do it again. The paint, I am not putting my paintbrush in the paint and dragging out. I am putting clean water and taking it to the paint. Like that. So I am starting from further away and actually what I'm doing is actually pushing into it. So what you can see is if we think of a line, say like here where we've got our hard lines on both sides, so what I'm actually doing is I'm using my inside line and I am blending and blurring that out. Can you see there? Look how much more pleasing that looks. So much more pleasing. And then what you can do is you can really, really go for it. See here, and blend it out completely. Again, constantly washing the paint off of our brush. Once we've applied the paint to the surface, we have the paint there. We don't need any more paint. If we start adding more paint to this, what we end up getting is a really, really flat surface. So here we go. Here, I can do exactly, see where you see then again it starts catching here, which you might like, you might want to keep. But if you really want to blend it out, the same thing happens. Clean water. Look, clean water, take it to it. Clean water, take it to it. And I'm agitating the paintbrush I'm sure there's loads of different ways of doing this. I am doing circular motions here. So I am circling away from it and blending out. So essentially those lines do exactly what I always want them to do, which is that they come from nowhere, they disappear from nowhere, but yet they're solid, sturdy, and visible to us. So look how much more pleasing that is. And look, if you can see that what we're starting to get is that really crisp paper thin line and edging that is lovely to look at, yet we don't lose any of the kind of softness that we have with watercolour. Here, that line to me looks more like acrylic, which is great. We can paint in acrylic for that, but watercolour, we're using it because it is light, it is soft, it is airy, it is free flowing, and that is what we've got here. So I'm going to show you with that bigger line. I don't know if it's dried too much for that. I'm going to show you the difference of what happens if you were to put the paintbrush in, I'm going to use my bigger one here, in it and bring it out. Can you see the difference there? And obviously I know we've got more paint there, but look how much harsher that is. That to me feels like we're painting a wall. Do you know what I mean? We've got a lot more paint there. We're not getting that thin edge. And what we end up with is we end up with a lot of paint that we're trying to basically get rid of. So always clean into it. Look, see again, look how the difference that makes with that edge. And every time you think you've got a bit too much paint, just clean it off. Even that, even though there is too much paint there, even that straight away looks so much better. Right, there we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I sometimes use that in a painting. So bear with me because I feel like I need to sneeze. It was a false sneeze, guys, that never materialised to anything of any real merit. You wait, in the middle of this, just as I'm doing something really delicate, I will chew all over the place and I'll ruin the entire thing. Never mind. Right, so here I've got this, literally, which is always off camera over there somewhere. I have basically a crib with a hell of a lot of like practice and experimenting and all of this sort of stuff. And to be honest, I rummaged through it to find something that I could use to demonstrate for you. And this is what I found in there. So this is just like an old like tester piece, me having a bit of a play around with colours and stuff like that. I think they were meant to be poppies. It's actually not as bad as I thought it was, so that's interesting. But anyway, it can kind of, I'll show you on this how I would use that sort of technique in an actual painting. And again, this is a cracking technique for petals, so hence the reason this one worked quite well. So you can actually see in this, because again, I used it as an example, but before, you can actually see how we have got a few little edges there that we have got. So I am going to show you. Now, the most important thing that I think I probably failed to mention, which seems a bit remiss of me now, when you are using this technique, the page, the paper, the surface you are working on needs to be 100% dry. If there is any moisture at all, even like the slightest amount of moisture, that line, even in the first instance, will go fluffy and bleed. So I will show you where this is wet here. If I was to try and even get a remotely crisp line on that there, do you see? Straight away, because the surface is wet, it bleeds. And in fact, even here where it's still, there's still quite a bit of moisture, not too bad, but it is drier there. But you can see that second time over that I've done that, you can see it's just not quite as crisp as that. So you do need a really, really dry surface. So when you're using this technique to layer up on other pieces of work, you need to allow what your whether it be your underpainting, whether it be your tone that you've put on, whether it's your background, you need to allow that to dry completely. Which is why quite often when I'm painting watercolour, I actually paint in stages. I find it personally very difficult to paint an entire watercolour painting in one go. I work on it in stages. So here, for example, because this hasn't been worked on for very long, it is completely 100% dry. So now I can look at that and go, right, here's my underpainting, or here is part of my painting. How am I going to improve it? What do I need to do? I want a couple more obvious petals, or I want some more lines on it, you know, like that sort of thing. And I can work on top of that. And the beauty about watercolour paint is that it's translucent. So we can create edging over the top of this without losing the detail or the colour or the movement that's underneath. So I will show you, for instance, here. Right, so here I actually have a little bit of a edge there that's already naturally formed, and I want to bring that out a little bit. So I'm going to use that technique that we used there, where I am going to go, I think I've got a little bit too much paint on there. So I'm going to use that edge and I'm going to go, oh, I want to make that obvious. Now you can see, you know how I said not that long ago about how that, look, you're drawing around this and oh dear, that doesn't look very pleasing at all. Like if we were to leave that like that, it looks very heavy-handed, very sticky, very tight. But I've put my edging in there, and then washing my paintbrush off. I've actually been a wee bit naughty. I've been swapping over what pot I've been using, but it's okay because we're using the same colour. So again, back to it. So we've put our line on there. So our clean water outside, and then just bringing it in using our circle motion, bringing it into that line there. So we're just agitating that surface. Now look, you can see already how we are maintaining that beautiful fluidity that we had got with all our wet on wet that's underneath it. We are still seeing the texture of that that poppy of everything underneath it. Like here, see, we're not losing any of this detail here, but we're just creating a slightly more firmer, more direct line in there. And you can really, like, anything that still looks a bit too heavy for you, just go in with your brush and just agitate it. Now, if you see here, this brush I'm using is actually quite short bristled, so you can actually like kind of like really really agitate the surface there. But look, see how you can then use that in a painting? I'm going to show you again, and I'm going to put, let's have a look. So same thing. I'm going to put, let's put a line in the back side here. And sometimes when you're drawing that line, you can actually break it up a little bit like that. So if you want it to fade off into the background like that, see how I've created a broken line there? Right, again, so paint applied. Don't need any more paint now, so we're going to wash that off our paintbrush. Now what we're going to use is the water. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but sometimes it goes in quite well when you do that. So again, clean water to our line. Really agitating it. If you feel like you've got too much water on your brush, you can just get rid of it, soften it all out. See that? And so those, you can see how those broken lines actually create almost an invisible line. Constantly, there we go. Look at that. Lush. There we go. Perfect. So that's like a really neat, cool little trick for you all. Right, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I haven't rattled on too much. I know I repeated myself quite a lot, but quite often, sometimes you need to see it 2 or 3 times, don't you, to like kind of really understand it. Plus, I always think that it's really useful to then see it being used in real life and how you can then go off and use it yourself. So I hope it's been helpful for you. I know it's not an entire painting, but it's an excellent technique that you can use. I've used it on petals today, but you can use it for edging buildings. You can use it if you were doing portraits or wildlife or any of those things. So yeah, it's just a really easy, good way to use the paint that is yeah, easy basically. Sorry, I tailed off completely then. I was like up here and then it just kind of like swiftly went down. Yeah, so like, follow, subscribe, message, show me what work you do. I don't know, all of that sort of stuff. Share, that's the other thing. And hopefully I will see you in the not too distant future. I've been working on some really exciting new work that I want to show you and also demonstrate to you. So that's exciting.